All right, good morning, everyone, and happy Talk Track Thursday. Today, for our Live with Larry, we have our very own enterprise solutions architect, Larry Hoehn, who sits down and provides technology insights with other technology advocates, along with other members of our team. This high-level series is meant to give you listeners insight from Burdock's own engineers, so you have the knowledge to make great decisions for your network and business overall. Without further ado, I will pass it off to Larry.
Cool. Thanks, Ariel. Happy Thursday, everyone, and joining us today. First, there's a bit of housekeeping. House cleaning. First, a little bit of housekeeping. Just wanted to make sure that you know that we're going to be answering your questions throughout this session. So please type your questions in the chat box. All the questions are good. And while you're there in the chat box, let us know what future topics you would like us to cover as well, or maybe recommendations you have about the format of this webinar. You know, we can dive into tech topics you find interesting or cover some best practices maybe around a concept like we're doing with today. So bottom line, the chat box is your friend. You know, don't be bashful. We're here to have an interactive session today. We're taking some time today specifically to focus on implementing some cybersecurity measures. If you want to stop hackers, the journey really starts by understanding, I think, what they want. So during this webinar, imagine your environment as a virtual house, like where the hackers want some of your possessions in a way that's going to be paying off for them. So kind of keep that in mind. For example, things that happen sometimes if an employee is discussing business over email, hacker may be able to get into the middle of that discussion by eavesdropping or even impersonating one of the people in the email thread. Or hackers might be able to use some of your vulnerable servers against you to launch your cyber attacks, against you or someone else. Or sometimes they'll even store some of that stolen data from other hacks on your servers. The list really goes on. The data is very attractive to hackers for many reasons. So joining us today for the discussion is James Carroll, one of our team of ethical hackers. When doing security penetration tests, sometimes the job's easy and sometimes it's tricky. I'll share a quick story with you. One of our account reps got a text message from James during a recent engagement asking why we need to make his job so difficult. I'm paraphrasing because there might have been a little bit of colorful language peppered in there too.
No doubt.
So my goal today is to help you understand how to make James work hard for his money. Does that sound good?
I like it. I like it.
So welcome, King James. How's it going for you today?
Good, man. How about you?
I'm doing great. Yeah, thanks again for joining us. Maybe can you tell us a little bit about your history? It applies to ethical hacking. You know, what got you to where you are today?
Yeah, for sure. So, I went to college, graduated college in 2013. And I remember, while I was in college, I didn't really, both my parents work for Lockheed Martin. They're both, part of the big defense contracting, department, and did a bunch of cool stuff there. So I always thought, growing up, like, I'll probably just work at Lockheed. It'll be great. I'll punch a time clock. It'll be awesome. I'll be kind of a small part of a big project. And then I remember I was taking a class, I think it was my sophomore year of college. And this guy came in to speak and he was talking about like, hey, like, this is what I do. Like, I'm a consultant. Like, I go around, I hack into places. I'm like, dude, that's what I want to do. Like screw Lockheed. I don't want to do that anymore. I want to do what this guy's doing. Right. Because he made it sound so fun. And it was like, I started doing research on it, graduated college, and kind of that was my track ever since I graduated. I'm like, this is the job I want. Like, I wouldn't look at anything other than pen testing, ethical hacking, mostly any consultant role, right? Because I wanted, I didn't want to just work on one network all the time. I wanted to work on different networks. I wanted to see what was out there. I want to see what was hard, what was easy, really just kind of perfect my craft at, how different verticals and technologies affect hackers and how easy or hard it is to get in, right? Like the text message I send at 1 a.m. to the sales reps, right? Yeah, that's kind of how I got into it. The first hacks I started doing was I was probably like in 7th or 8th grade at the time, and I was playing a video game called Halo 2. And what you would do is it's like Call of Duty. It's like any video game that you play or maybe your kids play, and you go online, you play other people. But the issue was in Halo 2, there was this really competitive ranking system. So the more you won, the higher up the ranks you would go, right? So if you won 10 games, you'd go up 10 ranks. The highest rank being a 50. So what you would do is I had a bunch of my friends, we're all like, nerds, and we all play this game all the time after school. and we'd all want to get, higher than the other person. So what I figured out, I actually found it was online. I found a tutorial, and I didn't know what I was doing. I was just clicking buttons at the time. What I ended up doing is I ended up joining a game with 4 other people and then kicking all of them offline. Because if I kicked them all offline, I'd automatically win. They disconnect. It looked like they quit, right? I won every single time. So that was kind of my first denial service attack, right? And, I'm in 7th grade. I know nothing about hacking. I just go online, find this forum. This guy's like, yeah, download this, press this button, press this button, press this button, and you do it. And I just followed and did it, right? So I was like the true definition of a script kiddie back then. Like I was just following orders, right? So that's how I got into it. And then at that point, I was like, dude, this is crazy. Like I know nothing about hacking, but I can go in here and then, just follow this and I have all this power. I can literally turn off someone's internet with 4 clicks of a button. So to me, that was just crazy. And that's kind of where my passion for technology and security and hacking really came in. So ever since then, I think I got a little bit better since then. I'd like to think, but it's fun, nonetheless.
You're getting paid to live the dream, man.
You could say that.
Yeah. Oh man. How so go into a little bit like a new person wants to get involved, like maybe to be an ethical hacker. Just kind of, it's a little bit off track, but I wanted to kind of go down here for instance. How does someone go about becoming an effective ethical hacker?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. I mean, even now you see some of our best guys on our team, they don't even have college degrees, right? And the main thing I look for when I'm looking for them is you gotta have passion, right? And I think hacking or really even being in information security or technology in general is one of the hardest verticals, right? You think about, let's think of like tax laws, right? Tax laws over the course of 3 or 5 years, they don't really change a whole lot, right? They change a little bit. Technology over the course of 3 or 5 years changes a lot, So you're always, what I always say is you just got to prove you can learn. If you prove you can learn, right, you have like kind of the logical thinking pattern down, you can be a great hacker and you have passion for it, right? Because the hackers work every single day to beat you. You got to work every single day to beat the hackers, or at least, learn what they're doing, figure out how they're doing it. And then from a blue team perspective, figure out how can we stop this from happening, right? It's really tough. And I think a lot of people in the technology world put in hours and hours and hours after hours, from work on the weekends, learning this stuff to get better, which I don't think a whole lot of other verticals do. It's a tough job, but it's really rewarding. It's really rewarding.
Yeah, that's like, just in general about the IT field myself, it's like I'm always learning. There's a lot of time that you're spending in that area and trying to stay up on top of it. So there are certain steps typically that people can take in order to be like maybe earlier on when they're in middle school, high school, different traits like you're talking about that they could focus on, or maybe participating in some of those sanctioned kind of blue team, red team exercises. What are your thoughts with that?
Yeah, no, that's awesome. Like I know a lot of colleges now, even the college I went to, they do like it's like an annual thing where all the colleges it's all the State University of New York schools. They have a big conference, they get together, one X amount of schools are the red team, these schools are the blue team. They try to hack each other, right? And at the end, whichever side wins gets a medal and stuff like that. But I think it's awesome, man. I wish they had that stuff when I was in college. And really, I think a lot of colleges are saying, hey, pen testing is like it's a big vertical, right? Not only that, but kids love it, right? For me going to college, I go to a class on policies and procedures and disaster recovery and business continuity stuff. I'm like, yeah, this is great. I'm going to my class on hacking. I'm like, dude, like I love hacking. Like I don't want to write policies for a living. I want to hack. Like that's fun. Policies are boring. You know what I mean? So that was always me. I think a lot of kids see that as well. But I was talking to a college 2 months ago and I said that same thing and a kid raised his hand. He's like, honestly, I really like policies. I'm like, listen, man, if that's what you like, run with it, man. But for me, that's not my jam, like that doesn't get me out of bed in the morning. Like, damn, I can't wait to write an 800-page, continuity planning, disaster recovery policy. I'm like, no, that's just not me.
Wow. Has the method or the skill that you've needed to acquire changed much over the years? Would you say to be effective in your job?
Yeah. I mean, the kind of the part that's changed the most is just the different tools and technologies, right? And I always think hacking, or at least information security, it's a group of people that literally they want to help each other a lot. And a lot of the best tools out there are free. You got great, you got like Core Impact, you got Nessus, you got Burp Suite, you got, all the tools that cost thousands of dollars, but you can go on GitHub, right? And there's just researchers out there like, hey, I developed this tool. It helped me a lot when I was doing pen tests. I'm going to give it to you guys for free. But yeah, I mean, you just got to keep up to date on the tools, the technologies, what people are exploiting, right? Like right now, SMB relay is huge in hacking. When I first started hacking, it wasn't even a thing, like, right? You just exploit Windows boxes. No one ever thought about doing that. So that's been kind of one of the bigger changes that we've seen is just man the middle type attacks. Phishing is always going to be big, right? Social engineering. I don't think that's ever going to change, but the method of which you perform those attacks is going to change, right? Because you got Mimecast, you got different spam filters now that they're going to stop a lot of stuff. You got to be a little bit better, right? You got to be, all right, let's encrypt our sites with, TLS. Let's, use some weird characters in the email that might be able to bypass Mimecast. You got to be on your game because as those defenses get better, your attack has to get better as well.
Yeah, that makes sense. It's a moving target and kind of goes back to the always learning thing that you're talking about before, which is really cool.
Always learning, man. Always learning.
Hey, can you share maybe one of your favorite ethical hacking experiences that you've had in the past? Keep it PG for the sensitive ears on the line here, though.
Yeah, Larry, we got a lot of non-PG ones. Yeah, probably. I mean, there's a bunch. Probably one of the favorite ones that we've done. I mean, for physical break-in is like part of what we do is we physically break into buildings, and they're always the best. They're just the most fun. Even with COVID, right? I did one not that long ago with COVID, and the difference between normally I go, let's say I want to break into I don't know, Acme Corporation, right? I sit in the parking lot, I see what their badges look like. I see what their uniforms look like. I go home, I have a print shot, make up a badge and make up a uniform. So, I look like the real Acme Corporation employee. I go in, right? A lot of times you go in, if they're a smaller company, they might look back at you and see your face. I'm like, I don't recognize this guy, and they question it. With COVID and everyone wearing masks, it's like impossible, right? They look back, everyone looks the same. They're all wearing masks, right? So we had 3 break-ins since COVID, and every single time we got in because of the masks. And to me, that was like pretty interesting. I'm like, damn, this could be a big vulnerability just from a physical security perspective of you can't see faces, right? And then there's facial recognition, stuff like that. I mean, even try whipping out your iPhone and unlocking that with your face with a mask on. I mean, it's nearly impossible. So for me, that was just kind of crazy. Like, wow, all these facial recognition systems, cameras that are identifying facial features, that might be a big vulnerability for the new mask culture. One of my favorite stories, individual stories of it is we did a job for a company. They're a big defense contractor, and what they did is they pretty much when IEDs or explosives went off in Iraq or Afghanistan, or they were recovered by our troops, they'd ship them back to this company. What they do is they dissect them, see what technologies are used, see who might be behind the explosives, or who might have built it, or what nation was responsible. So we were actually tasked with physically breaking into that facility, and they're in California. It was very, very, their defenses were big. Like they had armed guards, they had barbed wire fence, they had everything because, they handle some really, really sensitive and dangerous material. So what we ended up doing is in order to get in, we saw there's only one person that gets in and out, and it's the FedEx guy, and it's FedEx Custom Critical. What they did is when they'd ship those explosives back, they'd ship it through FedEx Custom Critical in these big plastic cases. They'd go in and did get by that way with FedEx Custom Critical. So, all right, well, the only way we're going to get in is through FedEx. Like, well, how are we going to stay in the building? What we ended up doing was making a huge case from a machine shop, putting a guy inside of it with life support. And then we got a truck, put FedEx Custom Critical on it. We had the FedEx badge. We had FedEx everything, FedEx uniform. We had the thing you signed for, right? We had everything. So we figured out what time the guy went every single day, went earlier than that, and actually delivered a guy with life support inside of a box into the building. Once he got in, he waited about 8 hours till everyone left. The box was locked on the inside. The locks actually locked on the inside. He unlocked it, popped out, and hacked the network that way. So that was normally it's not that hard, right? Normally you're just following a guy in, but there's the occasional one where it gets a little Ocean's 11 out there,
Yeah. I can't wait the Hollywood character version of you in some movie. It's like whenever I ask you that same question, just when we're chatting and stuff like that, it's always a different story. It's like you're living the action figure lifestyle or something.
Oh, yeah. No, there's a lot of them, man. There's a lot of them. It's just, I was telling the guy today, dude, you got all these stories. I'm just like Dr. Seuss, man. Like, I don't know what to tell you. Like, I'm going to write children's books soon and everything. Just wild.
That's awesome. One of the things is like I feel like with what we do in security, we're in defense, right? We're trying to prevent the hackers from being able to get in, and sometimes I feel like we're a small army against a big army in many cases, or something along those lines. So, from your perspective as an ethical hacker, really, what makes hacking easier than just doing security? Why is it
Yeah.
so much easier for the bad guys to get in?
Yeah, I mean the reality is the bad guys only have to be right once, where you have to be right every single time. That's it. That's literally what it boils down to, right? And that's kind of the scariest part is the hackers only need to be right once. They need to find one bad password. They need to find one vulnerable machine. But you, as an IT admin, as a security operations center, you got to be right every single time. And that's the hardest part, right? And I always say, like, my job, it's not, I have the easier job, right? All I do is I find the broken things. I go out there and figure out what are the holes, how do I get in, how do I pivot? You have the hard job because you got to fix all those machines. You got to find the right technologies that work with your infrastructure. We both know there's a lot of political issues, right? There's budget issues, there's finance issues, there's hoops to jump through to get things done. There's teams of people that are responsible for things. There's systems owner or applications owners, and you can't touch their stuff and they can't touch your stuff. It's a mess, right? So for me to sit there and to hack it and log in and say, hey, I did this, patch this machine, all you gotta do is install this MS 17010 patch. That could be months of work depending on what it is, right? I mean, we're talking about hospitals. When I do hospitals, typically they're really bad. To be honest with you, they're probably some of the most insecure places I test. And the reason for that is because they'll have, let's say they have a MRI machine or a CAT scan machine, and the thing's 20 years old. It's running Windows NT, and you're like, well, what the heck's going on here? Like, well, the new one of those is $800,000. Well, that's an issue, right? You can't buy a new one of those every 5 years. So then they got to put the compensating controls in place. Do we put on a VLAN, right? Do we put next-gen AV on it? Do we take it off the domain? What do they do to kind of make that more secure? And that's really the hard part right there, is figuring out how do we make the system more secure, but also make it work for our business.
Yeah. Let's talk about that a little bit, because not just with hospitals, right? IoT is kind of a big thing, is really what you're talking about. So you have these vendor controlled devices that you plug in for a purpose. MRI machine, like you're referring to, or real common one that I see out there a lot that we run into, are just IP-based cameras that people have floating around as well. So like from your perspective, back to what we're talking about here for making your job harder, what are some of those things we can put in place? You mentioned VLANs and stuff like that are typically there, but what are those things that are in place that you're aware of as you're kind of like debriefing with the customer afterwards that they had that made your job a lot harder there for IoT?
Yeah, no. So pretty much what caused me to send the sales rep text messages is the real question. But I mean, there's a bunch of things, right? I mean, for the most part, when I go in a network, most of them are flat. They're completely flat. There's no segmentation. There's no VLANs. There's nothing. It's just it's all, I call it one big happy family, right? It's like the it's like a buffet line, right? Everyone feeds off the same data, the same servers, the same everything. And when networks are segmented, it makes my job a lot harder because I can't pivot as easily. Or if, let's say, I get to the HR network, I got to figure out, okay, where there might be a system that's dual homed, what might allow me to escalate, and then things just get real hairy, they get real difficult. It's fun, it's frustrating at the same time, but that does make life a lot harder. As far as technology, software configuration, that makes my life harder. I mean, next-gen antivirus will almost always make my life harder. And the reason for that is, I got my go-to tools, right? They're like my bread and butter, like Metasploit, PowerShell, stuff like that. When you're using next-gen AV or next-gen tools, most of them, not all of them, most of them will stop that. So the telltale signs, I try to exploit it. Nothing happens. I change, from a 32 to 64 payload. Nothing happens. And like, all right, well, I know it's vulnerable, so it's gotta be AV. And that's kind of where the rabbit hole starts, right? And you just start going down the hole. Well, what can bypass it? You use different tools. You encode it. You try to run it through virus tools, see if anyone, if anything will catch it. And at that point, it becomes more of an exercise in exploit development than penetration testing. It's like, well, I got to develop or craft some kind of payload that will bypass this AV. What we found a lot recently is that there'll be good next-gen AV, but when I block something, it never alerts anyone, right? So let's replay that attack there. If I try to exploit something, next-gen AV says, no, I know it's PowerShell, you can't do that. It blocks it, but doesn't tell anyone. then it gives me unlimited tries to keep doing it. Because it didn't alert anyone. No one's trying to stop me. It's doing it. It's blocking it silently, but it's not telling anyone. So I just keep going and seeing what's blocking, right? It's like guessing a password without a lockout. You just keep going and going and going until you finally get one that works. And eventually you normally do find a way around it to get it to work. But what you want is something that's going to tell you, hey, something bad's going on here. We blocked it, but you might want to take a look at it. Next Gen AVs really does make things a lot harder. The other thing is just basic configuration, right? And what I mean by that is like shared local admin accounts, right? So a lot of networks that we test, almost all of them, use shared local admin accounts. So like, you set up, let's say you set up all your servers, right? You set them up, you put them on the network. There's domain accounts that log into them. There's also those local accounts that log into them. And a lot of administrators use the same local username and the same local password for all those machines. And that it becomes a big issue where if I compromise one server, let's say it's the file server, right? And I go and I dump the hashes on it and I see, the username of, local admin and the password hash of whatever. Windows is beautiful in the fact that I don't actually have to crack any passwords. Now, I never have to crack a password in Windows. I can just take that hash value and then what we call is pass the hash. It's what the attack's called. So you just take that username, take that hash, and you just throw it around the network and say, all right, I got this value from this machine. What other machines have this local account enabled? And then if it's all the servers, which most of the time it is, then you went from compromising one server to compromising all the servers because they're all using the same password. When people use like stuff like Thycotic or LAPS, a local administrator password solution, when that's all unique, right, and we replay that attack, I can't log in. I'm on my own little island, right? Yeah, it's great. I compromise the server, but I can't use that information directly to compromise other servers. And that's when things get real sticky because, basically what you got to do is say, okay, you might have found a vulnerability on the server, but now I got to dig a lot deeper and say, all right, let's say I want to get to the domain controller. I got to find something specific on that because I can't use anything that's going to help me get there. So that's one of the bigger configuration things that we see. That's tough. Another one is if when we see that domain users don't have any local admin access. And typically we find that domain users have local admin somewhere, especially with remote work, right? A lot of times they have local admin to like a terminal server or a file server because they're logging in remote. They got to access stuff they're usually not accessing. And a lot of admin I've had last month two instances of this where admins were just like, you know what? They need admin access stuff for remote, so we're just gonna give them admin to these 5 systems. So what happens there is if I compromise their password, right? Let's say the password's a fan favorite of summer 20, right? Let's say their password is summer 20. I get it. I'm now admin on 5 machines. Since I'm admin on 5 machines, right? I can say, all right, let me log these machines. Are they? Can I grab that local admin account? Can I pass it around? If they're admin on those 5 machines, they can do anything. They can make configuration changes. They can install software. They can install malware. Right? They can change registry settings. They own that machine. Typically, if we go into an environment and they have next gen AV, they use LAPS, and domain users aren't admins, it's going to be a tough go around for sure. That's going to be what I call a sweaty one. It's not going to be easy. It's not going to be easy. There's some other stuff out there like they're really hard at networks using stuff like Forescout. Where like, if detects you doing malicious stuff, it just sandboxes you. And that's always frustrating because you're like, well, what the heck? I just saw this whole range and now I see nothing. Like, what's going on? And there's like, everything's just changing all the time. Like that makes life interesting. We'll just say that. But a lot of stuff out there, man, that can make a hacker's life hard. A lot of stuff.
Yeah. Well, there's a lot I want to appeal with some of the things that you were referring to, but just wanted to pause for a second and check in with Ariel to see if we had any questions so far from the audience.
Yeah, there was one. You guys kind of touched on it earlier with the masks and stuff, but someone asked me, how has hacking changed during COVID?
Yeah, so from the physical perspective, right? People wearing masks when you get into a building, right? Usually they can look back and be like, hey, I recognize that guy, or hey, I don't recognize that guy. Masks had made that a lot different, or at least a lot more challenging for them to realize who works there and who doesn't work there, especially if you're in a larger organization. From a network perspective, a lot more people have access to VPNs, right? A lot more people have access to remote tools. Cloud services are going through the roof because people are, throwing stuff in the cloud now because for easy access. So we're finding that by guessing a password, right, or using a username with a weak password, you now have access to more things, right? Because before, not everyone had VPN access, not everyone had access to, Salesforce, but now, access is opening up. So we're finding that, a little goes a long way now. I mean, it went a long way before, but even more so, which is, it just makes things like two-factor authentication even more important, right? And the other good security hygiene.
Good thing you talked about cloud, because that brings us to our next question that was on here. Someone asked, how has cloud-based apps or cloud-based IaaS changed your approach when it comes to finding weaknesses in your customer system? Is it easier or harder to hack?
Yeah, honestly, it depends on the configuration. We've had the networks where they use two-factor on everything, right? And then when you go to, Drive or Box or ShareFile or Salesforce, it's the Wild West, right? They don't use two-factor. You just use a password, you log in. So for the networks that kind of neglect the cloud, at least the authentication protections, it's easier, right? Because you go, all right, VPN, two-factor, webmail, two-factor. Well, if Salesforce doesn't, everyone logs their emails to Salesforce, so I can go to Salesforce and see literally everyone in the company's email. Same with like Box and Drive. So the best networks that we find are ones that use like a single sign-on, like an Okta-based service where it's one gateway. That gateway gets you to your other apps, and you just use two-factor on that. Log into that, boom, you can then access all your other apps. But that's the main thing we've been seeing.
Yeah. Well, I think along those lines, back to the other thing that you were referring to, there's some of the newer technologies really that have been coming out lately, going back to what you're mentioning, like with, I guess, network intelligence. So now it's neat to see that like AI and machine learning is really starting to play a bigger role with, I think, defending the environments that we have as well, at least notifying us when something seems to be not normal on the network. And you can use like you mentioned, it could be a Forescout, could be Extra Hop, could be a dark trace kind of a solution that's looking at more from a network layer. Cisco has solutions that are doing that as well that we work with, and it's neat to see that it can start ingesting that information and seeing what normal kind of quote normal traffic is. So if normally this individual is accessing these databases or whatever, maybe these files are transferring a certain amount of data during working hours, and suddenly it's happening on a Saturday or something along those lines. And to have that ability of notifying that, and not even just from the network layer like that one happens to be, but like you mentioned with tying it in with next generation antivirus, which I think everybody knows, but just in case, the big difference between a next generation antivirus and the old antivirus, the legacy one that sometimes we still see out there, was that the old one had to use a definition file and know what that fingerprint of an actual virus kind of looked like. So every file would be scanned in order to be able to see if it had a virus or not. To the newer style, which doesn't necessarily use a definition file, instead it's behavior based. So it's kind of looking at what's being executed or what's the way that things are happening on the system itself and being able to block them from that layer. But what's neat is even those manufacturers tend to be able to have methods from at least an endpoint perspective to see what's normal within a person's environment. It might not look at the whole network, but in that case, it's looking at endpoints to see what's normal and what's not to notify. And even with a central logging, we're starting to see that a lot. There's a detection and response that's happening from a SIM perspective that's starting to evolve as well. So have you noticed that when you're pinging to a network, you're starting to kind of do your recon, you're kind of knocking on the doors to see where the weaknesses might be, that one way or another you're starting to get notified by those guys saying, yeah, we noticed that you were trying to get into our network.
Yeah, no, and a lot of times I'm impressed. Like most of the time, what I'll do when we're doing a network is the first approach is low and slow. So I just kind of passively look at some traffic, try to relay some authentication, right? I try to be as quiet as possible, especially if they're like, hey, we just bought, I don't know, FireEye or something, and we want you to see how good it is. I'm like, all right, well, let's put this thing through the ringer, right? And there's been a couple instances where I use a tool called Responder, and you can go on GitHub and download it. It's a really powerful tool on a Windows network, and I'll start that thing up, and I probably say 2% of my clients actually see it, and they're using something like, hey, I see that you're trying to relay authentication on this machine. I'm like, how the hell did they see that? You know what I mean? It's just crazy to me. It's nuts. But we'll see that sometimes. Like, one thing I always tell clients is, people are like, oh, my network's infected. I'm like, dude, your network is, your endpoints are infected, right? It's not your network getting infected, it's your endpoint. So start with really good next gen AV and stuff like that, and you'll be good to go.
Yeah, it's just neat to see that that's getting kind of baked into the newer generation of these products. So there's kind of still the old methods that you could still do central logging, you could still do AV, you could still do these other things, but what I love is that you're able to like integrate these solutions together in a way to kind of see the big picture, for what's happening out there in that respect. And essentially, not only is it making the job harder, but then we're also getting notified when someone's knocking on that door. It's kind of like having that Arlo camera on your house or whatever. When it detects it, spins up and it sends you the notification that someone's at the front door.
Yeah, no, and that's what you want, right? You want, like I said before, you want something that's going to stop that attack, but you also want something that's going to notify you of, hey, this happened and I stopped it, and just take a look at it, right? Or alert someone that it happened. That's the big thing there, and a lot of the next gen AV will do that. And that's when you kind of, that's when life gets hard for me, is when you see stuff, you got alerting, you got blocking, you got kind of the trifecta of things, right? Alerting, blocking, and then prevention. When you get that to that level, that's when I'm spending a lot of time trying to do some bad stuff.
Yeah, that's really cool. And the other neat thing too, I think, is that it's not a big mountain that needs to be climbed when it comes to putting some of these things in place. It could be time to renew the antivirus anyway. It's like, let's see what the newer features of some of these capabilities are for the next gen stuff that's out there, or same thing with a SIM, or same thing with some of these other areas on the network side potentially too, what the network management tool might be that was being used in the past, and just kind of taking it to the next evolution is a small step that can be done. Or also back to I think you mentioned earlier before, domain users having local admin access on PCs or something along those lines. And that's a project sometimes that can be like it can seem like a big mountain that needs to be climbed in order to put something like that in place. But even with that, breaking that project down into with a privileged access manager into smaller bite-sized chunks, so that way the people who use the PCs can still do what they need to do on a day-to-day basis, but not necessarily giving away the keys to the kingdom for what you would need in order to be able to get into the environment, right?
Yeah, no, for sure. And that's a big thing. And kind of that's when you see networks become more advanced, right? Like I said, when I go into a network and I get domain user creds and I'm not admin anywhere, I'm like, this is going to be tough, right? If they went through the measures of making sure that users aren't admins, life's going to be hard, right? And then typically after that, what I'm like, if I'm not admin anywhere, I start looking at shares, what network shares are open, right? Because when I'm checking for there, and there was a client recently that we found this on, is users have access to shares that they probably shouldn't have access to. I remember one network I did not that long ago. They had everything. They had like next gen AV. They had local laps enabled. Domain users were an admin. But what domain users could access is they had write access to a share that was running a web server. So what I was able to do is upload a malicious file, PHP file, to the web server, go to the web server, just navigate to the page which ran it, right? The server gave me a shell. The web, I think it was Apache, gave me a shell. Apache was running as admin, and because it was doing that, I actually got admin access to it that way. So you kind of got to, there's ways around it, right? Like a PHP file on Apache isn't, Next-Gen AV says, hey, that's what it's supposed to do, right? It's supposed to serve PHP files. So it looks pretty benign, but you go from giving a user write access to a share that, it's like, hey, it's not a big deal, turns into a big deal, right? That's the path of getting access to the server. So you really want to make sure, what I always say is, least privilege is big. Make sure users only have access to things they need to: machines, shares, data, services, cloud apps. If they don't need access to it, don't give them access to it. And you want to start now, because, when your company grows, 2-3-fold over the next 5 years, it's just going to make it much, much harder. So get on top of it as soon as you can, and you'll be happy you did.
Yeah, very cool. Just checking in again with Ariel. Any questions again so far?
We have one on the line. Someone asked, how do I share the importance of pen testing to my upper management and executive team who may not be the most technical?
Yeah, so there's a couple of things there. A lot of times when we do pen testing, it's a requirement for compliance. So like, if you're a bank or a healthcare institution, you're required to actually have it done, usually at least annually, depending on how big you are. Some want it biannually, some want it quarterly. If it's not a compliance requirement, the conversation is like, hey, we've been lucky, we haven't been hacked yet, but we want to bring someone in to try to hack us to make sure that we can't get hacked. Or if they can find things, what can we do to plug that hole, right? Because really what it's giving you is giving you a real world view. It's like, hey, I'm a hacker. I'm going to breach your security, but I'm not going to steal your data. I'm going to write a report and tell you how to plug those holes, right? It's like, banks hiring bank robbers to go in and rob the bank, but at the end of the day, instead of stealing the money, they go, all right, here's a report that says, hey, this is how I did it. In my opinion, and I'm probably biased because I do this for a living, but that's variable to every single company out there. I mean, to figure out what your security holes are, what you need to plug up to secure your company. And if you're talking to board, right, it's their company, it's the CEO's company. He's got a lot of skin in the game there. This is what we should do to protect our business. More importantly, this is what we should do to protect your business. And it's pretty powerful when you phrase it like that.
Yeah, I think along those lines, sometimes I feel like after you're able to go in and do your thing, come up with a list of, okay, here's the chain of events that need to happen in order for me to get to the prize at the end. There's technical folks that we can be talking to, and it's one level of conversation. In other cases, I feel like I'm an interpreter to another language, from what your speak was to what the non-technical person perhaps may need to help interpret. So it's a matter, I think, in those particular pieces of kind of converting it more and understanding if that's who the audience is. I think we need to kind of take that step back sometimes and understand really what the monetary value is or what the risk might have been in those particular cases, so we can kind of talk at that level as well.
Yeah, no, for sure. And I like to think pen testing allows you to figure out where you need to spend money, right? So like, let's say we do a pen test and like, we need to, we need to implement, we need a new firewall. This firewall is terrible. It sucks. So you go in and I'm like, this firewall is actually pretty good, right? But your AV is terrible. But you need to bring in someone to do, outsource SOC, or you need to do this. A lot of times it's like people think they need to do something, but when you test it, it's really not bad. It's actually pretty good. Like, no, why don't you allocate those resources towards something else? That would make you more secure, at least give you that extra layer of security. And that's always fun.
Did you have any other questions, Ariel, yet?
Nothing right now. I'll let you guys keep going.
Okay. Yeah, so I wanted to go back to the PHP instance that you just talked about, James. So like in that particular case, it sounded like an Apache server or some other web server had a vulnerability that was there where you're able to plant PHP and execute that to do what you needed to. Can you go into a little more like, I understand how you were using it in order to exploit a vulnerability, but what are some of the ways, because I know you're engaged too after an actual breach has happened, with customers as well, right? Where you're kind of figuring out and doing a little digging on the forensic side. So how has that kind of, as an example, that vulnerability been used by the dark side?
Yeah, no. And from like when I did it was from an internal perspective, but we see it execute a lot in the external perspective as well. Like if there's a web server, it can either be what we call it an RFI, a remote file inclusion vulnerability, or, there's an FTP server out there that allows anonymous access. You get on that, you plant that file, you run it. It's pretty much game over from that point. From a forensics perspective, what we're seeing a lot is, especially now after COVID, COVID is we're seeing a lot of people opening up RDP. Like, hey, we don't want to invest in more VPN license. We just want to open up RDP, terminal server. Everyone logs in through that, right? Well, at that point, usually what the common configuration is there is they give everyone admin access to that server. They log in, everyone's local admin to that server, everyone that can access it. When attackers see that, right, it's like, a shark smelling blood in the water. It's like, dude, if I just guess one password, I'm admin on this server, right? And you got a company of 300 people in there. It's only a matter of time before someone's using password 1, password 2, right? Winter 20, fall 2020. It's literally only a matter of time. And if you don't have logging in there, if you don't have lockouts in there, you're giving them a free pass. Just keep guessing that password. And sooner or later, one breaks. When it breaks, they get admin to that server, right? They start locking stuff up. They start installing malware, ransomware. Then you got the IT admin that logs in at 8 a.m. on a Monday morning. He's like, what happened to all these files? All these PDF files are dot locked. What's going on here? And those are the calls you don't want to make. You don't want to be that IT admin picking up the phone and saying, hey, what something happened here? Can you come in and help us out? And we get them. I mean, we have a 1-800 number that we use. You guys can, if something happens, customers call it. I mean, I was driving home from Boston at midnight on Sunday, and I got a call on it. I mean, it's ringing off the hook all day long because this stuff is happening. A lot of it is RDP. A lot of it is webmail based too. We'll see a lot of people using weak webmail passwords on like Outlook 365 and stuff like that, where hackers will guess that password, log in, create a forwarding rule so that all their mail gets forwarded somewhere else, but also gets saved to the inbox. Then you literally have a hacker that's getting all of your mail, reading all your documents. They're replying to stuff, right? That looks like you're replying to. They're taking all the replies back to that, putting it off site. So a lot of bad stuff, and a lot of it goes back to passwords. Honestly, I mean, the one of the biggest issues we see is that companies still require, and even compliance frameworks, right? They say, okay, you need to have a minimum of 8-character passwords. Humans being humans, right? Let's shoot for the minimum. I don't want to be, but I want to be better than the minimum. That's just human nature for the most part, right? So I'm just going to use an 8-character password, right? Password 1 with a capital P, 8-character password. Summer 20 with a capital S, 8-character password. So hackers know this, right? They know, okay, well, most compliance frameworks and most companies use 8-character passwords. Humans will be humans. Let's just use a list of those passwords, and they just rip it across, sites, domains, technologies, cloud apps. And when they get in, right, it's game over. So I always tell people, it's like, you don't have to be the fastest. You just don't want to be the slowest, right? And right now, 8-character passwords, you're the slowest. That's the slowest that's out there, or some of the slowest that are out there. Change it to 10, change it to 12, because attackers aren't using 10-character. Using 12-character word lists. If you want to take it a step further, educate your employees on, hey, this is a password and this is a passphrase. What I mean by that is, like, a password might be, your old password might be, I don't know, Blue House 10. Your new passphrase is like, I live in a blue house on Maple Street 10. Right? It's a phrase, in my opinion, and I might be biased, but my opinion is it's just as easy to remember, but far, far, far more secure. You couple that with like 2-factor authentication. I mean, you're essentially, I hate using the word bulletproof, but you're damn near bulletproof if you're using passphrases and 2-factor. I've yet to do a forensics instance where someone was like, yeah, we got, our VPN got breached, but we're using 12-character passwords and 2-factor. That day is yet to come. I don't see it coming anytime soon.
Yeah. Speaking of 2-factor or multi-factor authentication, I would imagine that's one of those things, in addition to the longer passwords that you're referring to, that's really helpful. But have you seen times where you're doing your thing and you're still able to get into an environment, even though they had multi-factor authentication, maybe not fully rolled out or something along those lines? Yeah, so we have seen that. We've had instances of clients at 2-factor just for certain business units, not all of them. So, we're testing all these people. Some have it, some don't. We're able to get into webmail. A lot of times we'll find it, if it's not in everything, we get into their webmail, right? And then we say, okay, we're in their webmail. Let's try to get into the VPN. And the VPN wants 2-factor, but the 2-factor code goes to their webmail, right? So it's like, well, I breached their webmail, and I go to the VPN and it says, okay, enter your 2-factor code, gets sent to the email. I got it, right? So you want to avoid doing it to webmail. You really want to do it to a phone using Duo, a PIN, a push token, or a push notification, or something like that. Something that the user has right on them, something physically that they pull out of their pocket, whether it's one of the old school hard tokens or a soft token, and validate it that way. Because
And when you start doing it through webmail, that means you can't have two-factor on webmail, right? And we see it all the time. It's like, well, yeah, it goes to webmail, but in order for them to get two-factor, you can't have it on webmail. You want to protect absolutely everything out there, including webmail, just to cover all the bases.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah, that's true. And in the it seems like in the industry buzz lately, one of the other recommendations that I've seen along the lines of multi-factor authentication is not to have the code pushed via SMS even to a phone, because people can there's other ways to work around that. Seems like it's a little less likely that that would be the case and a lot more targeted if that was going to be happening. But even in that particular case, using the app is probably what makes sense to get the codes right.
Yeah, definitely. And, I've had some clients be like, yeah, we know we're not supposed to use the text message, so we're just going to hold off on using two-factor until we can get an app. I'm like, dude, no, like any two-factor is better than no two-factor, right? Like if you can only use the text message, use the text message, right? I still have yet, at least from my experience, I have yet to see it on any project I've worked on, the text message get breached, and I've yet to do it myself. So the text message is still really secure. If you don't have Duo or one of the other apps, and that's all that's available to you, by all means, enable it, because it's way, way better than nothing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Okay. Any other questions so far, Ariel?
We did get a couple. I think this is a good one. How do deception solutions such as Ativo impact hacking?
I'm actually not familiar with Ativo. Larry, are you familiar with that?
No, I wonder if it's like more of a honeypot kind of thing.
Yeah. And we'll do networks that have honeypots. Like there's one popular one that we've seen, but a lot of times attackers will know it's a honeypot. There's some really cool ones out there that are like dynamic, where they'll actually like respond based on how what the hacker is doing, right? So if the hacker's like searches for passwords, right? They're like, so say they go to Windows Explorer, they get RDP access, they search passwords, it'll plant files like that. And that's really interesting to figure out what they're trying to do, right? What are they after? And it was a guy I worked with. He had it on his network, and we'd sit there and watch it, and you'd literally just watch him go down the rabbit hole, right? Because it plant fake stuff at every road, right? Like look for passwords. They find a password. They go to Citrix. They try to log in. It takes the password, right? It sees what they're trying to do. And you can figure out what the trends are, right? And one quarter might be, hey, these guys are going after banking passwords. The next quarter might be like, hey, they're going after socials, right? So that's pretty interesting. But for most of the time, for honeypots, a lot of hackers will go in, they'll find it. What we found is that if it's a VM, like if it's any kind of VM and a hacker gets access to it and they look at it and they figure out it's a VM, they're not even waste their time with it. They're off. And there's a lot of malware, like one in particular was Emotet. And when we analyzed Emotet, when it was on bare metal hardware, it was completely different. It started stealing banking credentials. It was spawning fake processes. You try to kill it, spawn new process. It actually took the icon of the malware on the desktop and changed it in MS Paint like every 3 seconds. So this is an automated script to make a different signature so that AV couldn't pick it up. But when you put it on a VM, like in a virtual sandbox honeypot environment, the thing would do nothing. Like it was smart enough to know, hey, I'm not on bare metal. I'm not doing anything, so you can figure out what I'm doing. So we've seen that as well. So hackers are getting smarter. I don't know if honeypots are as useful as they've been in the past, at least from a defense perspective. And the one thing that you want to avoid is if they figure out your public IP block, they look and there's a honeypot on there, they might give you more attention now, right? Like, hey, there's something here. We want to give you more attention. From a defensive perspective, at least let you know of hey, this IP is trying to hack us, but I mean, if you're going based off IPs trying to hack you, you'll be busy for a long time because I mean, they're all day and all night. You have to hire someone to keep blocking those IPs. So, but at the very least, if you're interested in hacking, you're interested in what hackers are doing or the trends, honeypots are fun in that regard, and deceptive technologies and stuff like that.
Yeah, I think from what I've seen with them too, because they're not uncommon to find nowadays. I see quite a few honeypots that are out there, whether it's an open source one that's available, it could be third party that are out there as well. And yeah, it's interesting to see more like, I think to your point, the hackers that are getting in part of their recon, they're not manually even trying to get in. They're kind of scanning things first, and part of that scanning capability is essentially determining if it's a honeypot or not. In some cases, it's able to, maybe not all, but in some cases, it's able to do that before they even waste any time on it.
Yeah, yeah, no, and all they need is all they need is one, right? So if they infect 150 people or 150 computers, and they go to yours and they're like, hey, there's not a whole lot of data on it. It looks like a honeypot. They'll just scrapping on the next one. They're all about efficiency. That's they hack them. A lot of it's automated as well, right? Or at least like Larry said, the first part's automated, finding the vulnerable holes, and they bring a guy in. And we talk about hackers, right? It's not just one guy. It's organized crime at this point. It's groups of people. They're working, out of offices in other countries, in Romania and Russia, and that's their 9 to 5, right? You wake up, you go to work every day. That's their job. That's how they make money. So they're not going to waste their time if they think something might be a honeypot. They'll just ditch it. That's how they put food on the table, Larry.
That's exactly right. That's what it comes down to, is the cash.
Yeah, it's all about money, man. It makes the world go around.
Yeah.
Even in countries where there's no money.
Oh man. Did you have another question, Ariel?
I did, but the whole time you were talking about honeypot, I was thinking of like literal honey. So it doesn't register in my mind, but we'll get there.
Honeypot.
Here knows.
Someone asked, have you seen any instances of SIM hijacking? Any advice for preventing?
I have not seen any instances of SIM hijacking or anything like that. For the most part, and I've seen SIMs that were like misconfigured, right? So you go in, and one great example was this company. It was a big insurance company. Went in, did an assessment for them. They like just spent millions of dollars on this crazy SIM. It was like something out of like Star Trek, like this amount of stuff they put into the SIM. Like it was a spaceship technology stuff, like things I even heard of. Like, all right, that's cool, like whatever. And I go in and I'm domain admin in 3 minutes, and nothing happens. And I wait 3 days, and they're like, hey, we just got an alert this morning that you did this, you did this, you did this. Our SIM's working. I'm like, yeah, your SIM's working. It's just 3 days late, right? Yeah, I did everything it's supposed to do, but it's too late at that point. So I always say, if you're going to spend the money on the technology, make sure it's implemented right? Whether you need to do it yourself, you hire someone, you bring in an outside third party to do it. We see a lot of times people spend money on, Thycotic and PAMs and next-gen AVs and SIMs. And, some of them do it just to check off a checkbox, right? They make it a vendor questionnaire that says, hey, are you using a SIM? And they buy it if they're on the network, and they check off the box. It's like, dude, if you're going to spend that much money on that technology, make sure it works. Make sure it's implemented. That's a big thing.
Yeah, I think to that question too, the only place that I've seen it happening is like Jack Bauer kind of stuff. You see it on TV a lot, where okay, let's distract this person and do that. But it is pretty tricky to be able to do, I think, and but it's not impossible, at the same time. And I would imagine that we'll probably be seeing it's wherever the lowest path of resistance really is, I think, is what it comes down to with a lot of these things. And when it gets to a point where that's the lowest path of resistance, there's going to be a lot more solutions that end up helping protect that moving forward, I would think.
Yeah, if SIM hijacking becomes the lowest path of resistance, then I'm just going to retire. Like, I don't it's not worth it anymore, But I mean, that day will come, right? Because before it was Windows vulnerabilities that were 15 years old, and you just go on a network and everyone has it, and it was always patching, right? Now places are patching. It's like, okay, well, the AV's bad, but now AV is getting better, right? So it keeps going up and up and up and up and up, and it'll get to the point where the easiest thing, it was the hardest thing 3 years ago. And it's already getting there, and that's why tools and scripts and technologies come out that make things a little bit more automated, a little bit more easier. But, like we said, the first thing we said is technology and hacking and security. The landscape's always changing, right? The technology's changed, the hacks change, the methods change, the tools change. It's always, always, always going to be a moving target.
Yeah, that's true. Hey, something I was thinking of too was, I know you talked earlier about local administrator privileges, where people can kind of do any administrative normal function on a PC. That's not good when it comes to their account getting hacked or you being able to get on there. But one of the other things I was curious about is, have you seen a difference? And it's starting to become more trending as I'm talking to my customers about this, where we're not just restricting the admin rights locally on the PC, but maybe disabling things like PowerShell and stuff like that. Would that have an impact on you too?
Oh, for sure, yeah. And what a lot of our clients will do is they'll disable PowerShell on anything that doesn't need it, right? They're like, hey, these workstations don't need PowerShell, so they just disable it. And even if I'm trying to gain access to a workstation, a lot of times I'm using PowerShell or I'm using WMI, and I'm just like, hey, if you disable this, right, that makes my job a lot harder. Coming the second, and a lot of this is I screw myself, right? Because I'll do the job 2 years in a row. The first year I'm like, do all this stuff. The next year I come in, they do all that stuff, and I'm like, now I can't go. Now I can't do anything, right? They did everything they were supposed to do. That's a beautiful thing when you see it. Unfortunately, you don't see it as much as you should. But yeah, if you do that, I mean, it makes life a lot harder. And that's when you got to start. Like one of the newest things we've been doing for networks that we see that does that is we use .NET. So there's all these new hacking frameworks out there like Silent Trinity, Covenant. They use .NET. And that's tough because it's got to be the right version, right? If it's not like 4.0.1782948, it's not going to work. So it's sometimes the long shot, right? But when you got no WMI, no PowerShell, AV's eating traditional payloads with stagers, you got to go .NET or something like that. And for some instances, we're actually able to use native tools like ProcDump, right, or something like that. Well, let's say users have RDP access to everything, which they shouldn't. We RDP in somewhere. I just run a registry save command, save the SAM database, take it offline, crack it, right? That's for like really, really advanced networks. We start doing native stuff because, a lot of times, even in stuff like Windows 10, right? Windows 10 is credential guarding. If I'm going against a network, it's all Windows 10 Enterprise or newer. They have credential guarding on. They have everything we talked about, Larry, to protect the network. It's just not happening, right? Like it's going to be very, 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 very hard because that network is going to be so secured from everything that I do. I'm going to have to pretty much find a 0 day on that net to figure out what to do. So if you do all the things right, you can shut down a hacker. And the goal of a pen test is to find the gaps, tell you what to do right, make sure you get it done right, come back the next year and say, hey, you guys, this is where you were at this year. Last year, this is where you're at this year. You've improved a ton. You exceed the compliance requirements, right? Your board and your CEO sees that, hey, this money went to good use because, we were able to, do all this stuff that we didn't even know needed to be done prior to having a pen test done.
Yeah. Well, even with all these other things that we're talking about, it could be what you mentioned earlier on was things like segmentations and VLANs, and we're getting into doing the software configurations or privilege access managers, some of the advanced detection capabilities that we were talking about, all the way through to even MFA. A lot of times those technologies were put in place, and what I've seen, and we have like our team as a service where we're constantly in a customer's environment, for example, or we at least do sometimes just like quarterly health checks where we're reviewing those things more often than once a year. Sometimes helps because the trajectory of the company, especially with things like COVID and stuff like that, typically have changed to the point it's like, well, let's readdress that sooner than later. Let's not wait that year until now. We're just now discovering all these vulnerabilities or the way that things are configured for remote access, for instance, and we can kind of keep it more constantly changing as opposed to like that one-time annual thing. It may not get rid of the 0 days that you end up having to revert to in the end, but at least it's getting rid of those maybe 10 days or something like that, right? The newer
Yeah,
stuff.
for sure. Yeah. And, what we'll see, a lot of times they'll go on a network and, people try to buy technologies or buy the newest and latest thing, but neglect to just do the simple configuration changes, right? It's like taking a Ferrari motor and putting in a beat up Dodge Neon. It's like, yeah, it's great. At the end of the day, you drive a beat up Dodge Neon with a Ferrari motor, It's like you want to make sure you got a good solid foundation and then start going up from there, right? And we'll see sometimes like you go on a network and there's 800 Windows XP machines, but they're using next gen AV. I'm like, that's great. You spent millions of dollars on next gen AV, but if you just updated your Windows XP machines or, you patched everything or you had some centralized patch management in place, you probably wouldn't need it as much as you do, right? And that's one of the big things I'll see really on a lot of networks and finance is they'll throw money at things, but then it's like, hey, you just all you got to do is spend a week, 2 weeks in configuration, and then make sure everything's patched, configured right. Start with that solid foundation, and then start implementing those technologies.
Yeah, I love it. Very cool. Ariel, anything else on the question side?
We do have like 2 minutes left. And so I just think we do have a couple questions, but I think I'll just send them to you guys once this call is over. But we do have a question that I think is great to end on. What are the steps to ensure the availability of all my systems while a pen test is happening? And what can they expect in the engagement, and what will they need to provide from their team?
Good question. So to ensure availability, when we do a pen test, what we always do is I say, hey, are there any systems that are old or outdated that might go offline? If so, we tread lightly on those, right? So if you have like for example, SCADA systems, I'm not a huge fan of SCADA systems. I test them because, if you take one down, you could take off the power for an entire state and do fun stuff like that. But say, hey, just let me know about them. And then we tread lightly on those. What we normally do is if we're going to exploit anything, I'll create a list of targets and say, these are all vulnerable. This is just from, my expertise of doing this. This is the chance of these machines going offline. If I try to do this, how do you want to proceed there? Normally you exploit them, there's no issues, but there are some machines and some exploits like Blue Keep that, you got about a 50-50 chance of blue screen the machine. So depending on what it is, we won't exploit it. So you just kind of go from there. As far as what we would need to do a pen test, I like to say that we're pretty low maintenance, and really the only thing I need is you just need the questions to scope it out, which is pretty much how many systems do you have, how many external IPs do you have, how many users do you have. As far as a pen test goes, not a whole lot, right? I just get the external IPs. I get on the inside, I do a discovery, and that's, believe it or not, the discovery, people are always amazed by the discovery because I just do the whole 172, the whole 192, the whole 10 net, find everything on the network, build an inventory list, and they're like, dude, I didn't even know we had machines on this 172 network. Like, what are these? And it's some remote office that they forgot about, and like ATM machines that are in the back room that should have been turned off years ago. And then we start doing the scanning and the hacking and figuring out, kind of weaving through how many different ways can we go from zero to hero, from nothing to domain admin. And then, of course, the end result is a nice report that says, hey, we didn't just get it one way, we got it 11 different ways. This is the path of how we did it. This is everything needs to be put in place to protect yourself from an actual hacker coming in and doing this.
Yeah, and just to add to that, it's really like it's kind of cool that our customers can bring us on board as an army of good guys, really, in order to be able to do the work. And so I think we're as collaborative as they want us to be, right, is what it comes down to. Sometimes they want us to come in where it's like, hey, we're going to give you hardly any info. You figure it out just like a real hacker would. And other times it's kind of like, well, you might be a hospital with some of these sensitive pieces of equipment, pumps and stuff that are helping people, and it could cause big problems, right? If there's a inadvertent exploit that happens on something along those lines. So we need to make sure that we understand that and we work with, and sometimes we can be very, I guess it would be very transparent with the work that we're doing at the same time, even with a time of day that's chosen to do certain things or certain sections of the network that we're picking, right?
Yeah. And that's kind of the beauty of using like a remote system or something like that is, you can say, hey, you can only test this machine off hours, not a problem, right? So, like you said, we'll do, 1 year you might do, hey, let's do white box, right? Just let me know everything. Next year, let's do black box. Let's try something different, right? What can an attacker get without any information from you guys? That keeps things fun for, me and my team as well. It's like, hey, let's figure out how to do this just from, open source intelligence, recon, guessing passwords, getting in, kind of finding the way around AV and stuff like that without anyone telling or without anyone being notified.
Well, nice, guys. Well, we reached a little bit over our limit. So thank you, James and Larry, for taking the time today and hanging out with all of us. For everyone else on the line, if you have any questions or want to schedule your pen test, see how long it takes James to get through. James, what is the fastest and what's like the longest or the average?
The fastest was like under a minute. The long, there's times I get skunked. I get skunked probably once or twice a month. Like there's no shame in it. It means that they did what they were supposed to. I told them to do last year. I got no problem with it. But it's like fishing, man. Sometimes you go in and it takes one cast. Sometimes it takes 20. Sometimes you come back with nothing. But it's just the way she goes.
We love it. We love your humbleness. Well, thank you everyone for joining. If you have any questions or you want to schedule your pen test, you can reach out to anyone here from Bird Rock. And if you wanted to learn more about our Talk Track Thursdays and what we'll discuss next, be sure to go to our website. And we'll see you next time. Thanks, guys.
Thanks, everybody. Stay
Thanks,
safe.
guys.
Talk soon.